This is the first of a series of 3 presentations that I'll be giving this summer because I'm a teacher and it's summer. So, hey, I'm going to teach other stuff in the summer. What else would I do? All about publishing tabletop RPGs. So this first seminar, as you can see, is about pitching to publishers. I'm a publisher. I have pitched successfully to publishers before. I ended up not going with that deal, which is a thing we'll talk about a little bit later on. And so I publish a lot of my own stuff, which is actually going to be our second seminar. Part 2 will be about self-publishing. And then the final seminar will be about distribution. And if you have self-published a game, how to get it out into the world. I also think this is going to be recorded and posted somewhere. So if you have to leave at some point, no problem. All right, I guess we will start to get started. So we'll go ahead and just start with, who am I? My name is Kimi Hughes. I own and run Golden Lasso Games. I'm a game designer and publisher. I am a Gold Emmy winner. One of my games won a Gold Emmy, which is amazing and exciting and very unexpected. I was like at the pool with my kid when it got announced. It was funny. I am also a Gamma Horizons Fellow. Gamma is the Game Manufacturers Association, and every year they choose some upcoming designers from marginalized communities that they put through an intensive and sponsorship program. The applications actually for the next cohort of that will be opening July 1st. So if you're interested in that, if you follow me on social media, I'll be blasting it out. But you could also go, if you go to gamma.org/horizons on July 1st, the application process should be open there. So if you're interested in that, I can also tell you more about that in another time. So you can always message me about these things too. I am the Gamma Pathways Committee co-chair now. So I'm running the program for future fellows and making sure that marginalized voices are being heard at Gamma. I'm also a member of the Indie Games Designer Network, which I know a lot of people here are as well. I own and I manage the Happy Jacks RPG Network, which does streams and podcasts. And I've also won some awards for jamming on actual plays and stuff like that. None of that part isn't so relevant today, though. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to go through 5 basic things. First, what to expect. So you know if you want to make the decision to work with a publisher, because it is a very different thing than publishing yourself. You lose a lot of control. So you really need to know what you're getting into and what you might be giving up before you make that decision. Next, we're going to talk about making your game. You say, Kimi, I've already made my game. That's why I'm trying to sell it. Well, yes. But in the perfect world, you would actually kind of bake into your development of the game, whether you're going to self-publish it or pitch it to people. And you might still need to tweak your game. Even if you have a completely finished game, you might still need to change it in order to make it appeal to different publishers. 3, we're going to talk about developing your pitch and what you need to make a pitch to a company. 4 is the pitch process, like what it looks like, what you have to do once you've developed your pitch. And then success. They decide to pick up your game. Now what? Legal things. Also, just to remind people, if you just got here, there is a channel for you to ask questions. So if you want to type stuff in there, I'm happy to answer. I'll probably go through each section, pause, and answer some questions if there are any at the end of each section, and then move on. And then I'll do a bunch of like an AMA typing answers at the very end. So you can also save your questions to the end, either way. Again, you're not going to be as bad as a bunch of 4th graders, so it'll be fine. All right, knowing what to expect. How flexible are you willing to be about your game? Our games are our babies. They are honestly, they're art for us. And it can be hard to give up that control. And that's a lot of what working with a publisher ends up being, is giving up some of that control. And there are great benefits to that. And sometimes there are some drawbacks. I'm going to go back for just a little bit of a second. Speaking about games as art, I know a lot of TTRPG designers. I know a lot of other like board game designers and things like that. It is truly a folk art. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this series is because it seems like everybody is learning it in like silos, like on their own, without contact with other people. Everyone's figuring it out as they go. And I really would love to start creating a shared knowledge where people can access these things and not have to figure it out themselves. So that's one of the things I really want to make from this. So please ask questions. So yes, knowing what to expect. How flexible are you willing to be about your game? So first off, working with a publisher has a lot of pros and cons, and it's important to understand them before going down this path. By working with a publisher, you're going to give up some or all the control of your game's final version. You will not pay for art, manufacturing, etc., but you will also make a smaller percentage of the profits, if there are any. Generally between 5 and 20%. That sounds incredibly small, and It can be very, very small, especially if it's after their costs are recouped. That's not universal. There are some indie games that are indie publishers out there who are really fighting against that. But that would be about standard, honestly. Pitching is an exhausting and sometimes very discouraging process. Anybody who knows an actor or somebody in the industry knows how hard it is to go put yourself out there again and again and again and maybe get rejected, especially when it's something you've probably spent months or maybe even years of your life doing. And most games will never find a publisher willing to make them. That's honestly just, the statistics of it. The number of people trying to get their games made by publishers versus how many publishers there are and how many projects a publisher can take on is there's just no balance there. So you have to be ready to, if you're 100% only going to go to work with a publisher, you might have to take the realization that someday that your game might not get made. So, are you willing to change your vision? If so, what are you willing to change? Are you willing to change the core mechanics of the game? Are you willing to change the writing, the messages or political statements that you made about the game? So there's so many games now that are, that are commentary or from lived experience. That are you willing to give up that piece of it? If you've written a game that's very much directed at, your experience as a, queer person in the world, and then you take it to a publisher and they're like, hey, we love this, but we want to make it more vanilla. We want to make it more palatable to a normal audience. Like, those are the questions you're going to have to kind of face. And you should know that before you go into the process about where you're willing to bend on those things. The presentation of the game, the target audience of the game. If you are writing a game that's supposed to be, for adolescents, and then you're like, and then they say, oh, this is really great. We want to age it down and we want to make it for little kids. Are you okay with that? And then having your name on it. There will be some, situations where they may not even want your name on a game. And are you willing to give that up in exchange for, whatever else they're offering you? And you need to know where you stand on these before you start pitching. Because if you are absolutely not willing to bend on anything, then you should probably go to my next seminar on self-publishing. It's a very hard, stressful road, but you do keep total control. You will not keep total control, even with the best publishers out there. All right. There's a running joke in the traditional game publishing, mostly board game, but it applies to TTRPGs too, because it's true. There's profit, control, or credit. You get to pick one of those things. Maybe two if you're a known famous designer. But the chances of you actually keeping, making a profit on a game, are very slim anyway. The margins for board games in general, but specifically TTRPGs, are incredibly tiny, even for big companies. So the chances of them making a huge profit and then passing on a huge profit via your small percent is very small. I'm good friends with a very well-known RPG designer, and that's one of the first things he told me. He had this game that just went massive, and it was one of the things he sat down and he's like, I've made almost nothing off of it. I'm now famous and I've made almost no money off this game that has sold probably, thousands and thousands of copies, because he made a deal with the publisher and got a very small percent. Now, because of the runaway success of that game, he was able then to leverage that notoriety and that success and the awards that game had won into his next contract, which is very important. So you have to kind of weigh that too. It's like, if I get a game published, you then have more power in your next negotiation. So that's also something to factor in there as well. There are some smaller publishers that are working to change this industry norm, but it's not even close to industry-wide. Snowbright Studio has a very unique model they're developing where they kind of share the costs of production and then share the profits more evenly. And that's a very interesting, take that they're trying out. It's a model that's still in development. They're a fantastic studio that focuses on publishing games from LGBTQ plus creators. And so they're just amazing people there, and they're trying to do the right thing. And then many other smaller industries might offer a higher percentage profit after the costs. I know MythWorks, they do a 50-50 split after they recoup their costs of shipping and manufacturing and such things. And then there's a lot of companies that are smaller, more indie, that let creators have a lot more say in the process too. So you want to make sure that you know how a company works before you pitch to them. And we're going to talk more about that in a little while. So it's not completely bleak, but you also have to kind of balance that out. If you work with a really big company, if you work with Renegade and Renegade publishes your game, they're going to sell thousands more copies probably than a smaller publishing house. So then you have to, balance that. Is okay, if I get 10%, I don't know what Renegade's contracts are, but just hypothetically, if I get 10% from Renegade, if I get 50% from a smaller studio, it might end up in the long run, you get more money from sales from Renegade because they sell more copies, even though you're getting a much smaller percentage, versus a smaller publishing house who doesn't necessarily have the same, they won't move the same number of product. So there's a lot of things there to consider about your philosophy and what you want your game to do and what you agree with and what you want the industry to look like. Because all of us, we are the next generation of game designers. We are going to be the ones who kind of help shape what the industry looks like. Are we going to, start changing things? Are we going to start, demanding different treatment? Or are we going to kind of like go with what's known so that we can work with, the big well-known publishers? So those are all choices you need to kind of reflect on and decide yourself. I'm just going to tell a short story real quick. After my game won an Emmy, because I self-published, I did actually go through the process of pitching the game and actually got an offer from a company to have them publish it. And there was like a deal breaker for me, which was the art. The art for my game was really just, my friend did it. We did it, who was an amazing artist and also a professional and was like willing to sign contracts and everything with this company, but they wanted to redesign the whole deck. And that was just something that was, I couldn't deal with that. So I decided to continue with self-publishing. I turned down that because that hit one of those pillars that I was like, no, this is something that's core to this game. Like all this art was drawn specifically for this game and this vision. And it won an Emmy with this art. So this is something I want to stick with. I feel bad abandoning my friend's art. So yeah, so just know where you're going to be and know where you stand with all those pieces of your art. So did anyone have questions for that first section before I move on? I don't want to scare people away from working with publishers, but I do want people to have a very realistic view of what it's like, because you need to know going in, because that's how you are empowered in those situations, is knowing the realities of it. If you step in thinking, oh, they're going to take my game as is 100%, it can be very disconcerting. It can throw you off in negotiations if they're like, hey, we love your game, but we don't want anything to do with the mechanics you've come up with. We're going to take your concept and everything you've written and put it on top of our in-house mechanics for this other game. So there's so many different things that they can propose for you. So you just really need to know going in what you're willing to do. And I'd like, seriously, go through your game piece by piece and think about, okay, the writing. All right, am I okay with them bringing on another writer or rewriting what I've done, with their, company voice or with someone who they think is just a better writer? So there's so many different things they can do. If you have a core mechanic they love, maybe they're going to get the game. Maybe they're going to strip it of all the stuff you've written and just use that core mechanic for another whole game. There's so many different options. And so go through it piece by piece. My games tend to be very role play heavy, very based on like relationships and specific messages and things like that. The one that I'm working on right now and I'm kickstarting soon is a found family game. So it's very much about finding trust and safety with people who are in your community. So that's the core of that game for me. So if they were like, hey, we love this idea, but we want to make it like a space fighter game. Well, no, that's not what the game is. So that would be a deal breaker for me. So this is a question from chat. Thank you. If you know you want to work with a certain IP or system that requires working with a particular or narrow field of publishers, how do you approach things differently? If you're talking about your design, they generally have like set design things. Or if you're designing a game in a certain IP, that's going to 100% limit what companies you can pitch to anyway, to like one probably. Like Star Wars right now, there's, Fantasy Flight has the license for most of all that. So definitely do your research on that piece. For things in an existing IP, you have a better shot of being hired on as a writer for a project they've already started than actually pitching a separate game. That's really a hard sell for them because that company already has their brand. They've already made products in that line probably. So they have their identity. They've got the layout and all that stuff that they like and that kind of the art style, all those things are kind of already set. So it's really hard to go into a situation like that where you're pitching an existing IP to a company that is already making products. You can go in and pitch yourself as a writer that is definitely something that is doable, and that is another way to get yourself published out there. I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, please ask a clarifying question in chat. Next one, you make self-publishing sound so much better than using a publisher despite not having a distribution and promotion network. Is it really that pathetic a situation? No, I'm not saying that it's better. They're just very different animals. If you come to my seminar about self-publishing, there's a lot of drawbacks from self-publishing too. It's exhausting. You have to do everything. You have to find people for every single stage. You have to learn, everything about everything. So there's definitely drawbacks to self-publishing too. So it's one of the things that it's the burden of the creative freedom. Are you willing to take on all the work of a full company, including learning about, distribution and manufacturing and dealing with worldwide, tax and VAT and all these things, tariffs, and what paperweight you want, and hiring artists and paying probably out of pocket for things like that. So there are definitely drawbacks to self-publishing too. I don't mean to make it sound all like, beautiful chocolates and roses and easy. It's not. It's a lot of work. It's exhausting. But if you're going to go the publisher route, there's amazing things. You can have your game in stores worldwide with very little effort after you make your. Now, I'm not saying making the game isn't a lot of effort. It is, but with a comparable, very small effort to someone who has to then pay and make their own game, get it printed and manufactured, get it shipped, all those things. You just have to make sure that when you're going into to pitch for publishers, you go in with a realistic point of view. So like someone going in for an audition for a movie, things like that. When you're pitching games, you're not sitting there in the audition room with like the other 40 people who are all trying for the same part sitting with you. So it's easy to kind of forget how many people are pitching their games. And you just need to understand where you stand with these companies. And like I said, there's a lot of smaller publishing companies that give you a lot more power, a lot more profit, and things like that. I don't mean to dissuade anyone from pitching their games. Like that's why we're here, right? You want to pitch your games. But in that process, you also need to be realistic about how it works. And that sometimes they, will want different things from you. So I hope that clarifies. Because I'm not trying to get people not to pitch their games. Like, that's absolutely, you should not go into publishing your own games unless you are willing to give, 25 hours of the day to doing that. And it's a huge priority because it is so much work. But on the other end, there's like the control. So you have to kind of think about, what kind of person are you? Are you willing to give up some of that control to have someone else deal with all the back end stuff? So hopefully that clarifies. And either way, there's a chance that people will maybe never get your game. You can pitch to publishers and then not have them ever pick up your game. But you can also go through all the expense and time of publishing your own game and have nobody buy it. So there's risks on both ends too. There's definitely neither one is like the only path or the better path. They're both incredibly challenging paths that you just have to decide, what you do. And maybe you do both. Maybe you pitch your game around, and then if it doesn't get picked up, you then decide, am I going to self-publish? Which is how a lot of self-publishers get started. I think it looks like someone's typing one more question. I want to make sure we stay on time with this. So I'll get to that question after the next section. So go ahead and finish typing it. Step 2, making your game. You've decided you want to try and find a publisher for your game. You might already have a game, or maybe you're working on a game, and the publication process and the process of pitching your game should probably be adjusted slightly for that. Once you plan to sell your game, it becomes a product. So games are a product. Decide the publishing plan for your game before you finish making it. Okay, once you decide to get a publisher for your game, it becomes a product. You need to know who you're making your game for, because they are now your target audience. So if you are an indie game publisher, there's a little bit of freedom of, I'm going to make this small one-person solo game about falling asleep with a candle, burning next to me while I'm sipping coffee, and then the hilarity or terrifying thing that ensues. Like really random small things. And that's beautiful. It's amazing art. I have a bunch of little games like that too. But if you're pitching it to a company, they're probably not going to want your small game about, watching koi fish swim in a pond and journaling. Maybe they do. There are some publishing companies, little small companies mostly, that will want games like that. So, but just like really reflect on it and think who would buy this game? If it was in your friendly local game store, who would be the people stopping and wanting to buy it? And is that target audience big enough to make profit for a company? Because if you're like, okay, I am making this game for people named Samantha who were born on Tuesdays, like that's going to be a very small section of the population. The overall amount of people who play in the gaming industry who do TTRPGs is already incredibly small. It can feel so big because we're like, oh, D&D is this big game. If you go to board game or tabletop game conventions, like Gamma Expo or things like that, it is such a small section of the gaming hobby. And most of the people at those large gaming conventions, they don't know anything about RPGs at all. So it's deceptive because we live in the world of it, how big a share of the market it is. It's not a very big share of the market. So we are already designing a product that is for a niche market. So then to dial it in and make it more niche can sometimes be a great marketing strategy, and it can sometimes really backfire. So you have to really kind of consider that as you're designing your game. Know what similar games are available or in development, and this might require you to pivot or change your concept slightly. You know, if you're working on a PBTA pirate game, Magpie Games just did their Kickstarter for a PBTA pirate game. So it's like one of those things where it's like, okay, now there's this huge, this company with huge reach in the PBTA space specifically that is, making this game. It's going to be a while before someone wants to publish something similar. So you might want to pivot it. Maybe, okay, it's going to be space pirates or whatever you decide to do. But you need to kind of be aware of that and the competition, especially if you're going to be pitching it. And consider the component or manufacturing costs in your design and keep that to a minimum. So if you have these super special coins that have to be used on your character sheets, if you have these specific maps that have to go, or, the special dice, we all did like the Fantasy Flight or their L5R dice, like that's really difficult and it gets really expensive really fast. So if you need to have special dice manufactured, not as like a Kickstarter reward, but actually to play the game, that might be something that, can really raise costs for a publisher and make them kind of hesitant to take on your game. And it makes it a little less attractive. Next thing, and this seems very counterintuitive, do not buy art. Do not pay for art. Do not commission art for pitches. Okay, seriously, don't pay for it. It's expensive and it's kind of a waste of money. Publishing companies will replace it almost 100% of the time. They want to use their own art direction team. They have a vision for it. They want to own the rights to the art 100% and will have their own contracts with artists they know can work on their professional timelines. So they will almost 100% of the time replace the art. A great example of this recently is For the Queen. So For the Queen was originally published by Evil Hat, and they did their art. It was beautiful. I own that original copy of the game. When Darrington Press picked it up, because Evil Hat doesn't do card stuff anymore, they had to own the art. So that is one of the reasons that they commissioned a whole new set of art for the Queen. So that they want to own the art. They want to make sure it's free and clear, that they don't have any legal challenges to it. They also want to make sure that they have the opportunity to own the art in a way that they can make merchandise and things like that if they want. So don't worry about buying art. Okay. If you want to make your game visually interesting, add stock art or grab images off Google that fit the vibe and label it as like placeholder art for your pitches and for the manuscripts that you're sharing with publishers. In the text, they're not going to even bat an eye at that. Like that's normal, and it's not for sale or publication. So, it's a little bit of a different situation. So find stuff that fits the vibe that you can get for cheap that kind of helps it. But don't fill your manuscript with tons of art either. They're looking for the heart of your game, which as much as art sells a game, like they're looking at the mechanics, they're looking at your writing and those pieces. And don't use AI art, even as a placeholder. Companies might just toss your game. It's too controversial right now. It also destroys the planet, even if you aren't making a profit on it. Like, don't put AI art in your pitches. It's just, yeah, no. Next section, let me go see if there's questions. Yes, AI art, don't do it. That's my personal opinion. And it's also like, as someone who's taking pitches for people like sending me their games to publish now that my company's kind of grown to that point, yeah, if I open a pitch and it has AI art, I close it immediately and delete it. It's just not personal preference. So stay away from anything like that that's going to immediately turn people off from your games. And also, it's just wrong, in my opinion. All right, developing your pitch. Know your game and how to sell it. You need to know the heart of your game, and you need to be honest with yourself about it. And you need to be honest about what your intent was and if your game actually does that thing. So this is a point where you need to be kind of brutally honest with yourself. Like, what does my game do right now? And what do I want it to do? And this is a little bit more of like the development process and getting feedback and things like that. I'm not going to go into it too much, but you have to know the true heart of your game if you're going to pitch it and sell it well. So, for example, D&D is a combat-focused power fantasy. People do not now. Some people play D&D with like big relationships between the parties and stuff like that. But if you look at the actual mechanics of D&D, there's not a lot there for that piece. They've been trying to add more in as it's gotten more popular. But at its heart, it's still kind of a combat-focused power fantasy. For the Queen is a collaborative story game about power dynamics. Starscape, which is my game that I'm making right now, I had to drop in something about it, is about trust, is about how trust is at the center of found family relationships. So by recognizing what your game is at its core, you can start to verbalize what makes it unique when compared with other games in the same setting, genre, etc. So Starscape, for example, because I've been practicing these pitches like a ton, is about found family relationships. It's a sci-fi game. You're in a spaceship, but it's not Spelljammer, even though you can do like a tall ship thing. It's not going to be Traveler, because it has its, unique lane that's different. So having, you can be a space game. There's a bazillion space games and still find a unique kind of take. And that's what you really need to catch people's attention when you're pitching that game. So really, really be honest with yourself. Like, what is different about my game? And then also be honest if you can't think of anything, because then that might mean that you need to spend a little bit more time developing your game and maybe finding kind of that unique angle. Companies do not want an indie redone version that is basically the same as another game that's out there already. Like, very few production houses are going to be looking for, I have a D20 based, high fantasy RPG. Because most of the people who are looking for something like that are going to play D&D or Pathfinder. So if you have some amazing, unique take on it, that changes things. So if you have that about, but it turns out, whatever your cool mechanic is or whatever it is. Or, for example, MythWorks just put out a game called The Wild Sea, which is fantasy, but it's also kind of swashbuckling, post-apocalyptic, like verdant punk is what they're calling it. So things like that. There's so many interesting takes on things. So make sure yours stands out and is different. Like, brutally look at yourself. Because if you don't look at your product brutally, the publishers will. And they'll be like, hey, this sounds exactly like D&D. Or, wow, so-and-so company did this 3 years ago. So you need to do that first so that you can tweak your project and your pitch to fit what they're going to want. You might only have one shot for your pitch. Okay, so verbal pitches. These are for in-person. You never know what's going to happen. You're at a convention, you're in an elevator, or you're in line to buy a drink or something, and, oh, hey, this publisher you absolutely adore ends up standing in front of you in line. Have it ready. So you need to have verbal pitches ready and practiced, but not sounding too practiced. Still sound friendly. You need a 2-sentence pitch. My game is about found family and space. Or whatever it is. That's 1 sentence, but you get the idea. Like a very short pitch. Then you're like 30-second pitch. If they're like, oh, really? That sounds interesting. Can you tell me more about that? Well, yes, it's a powered by the apocalypse, hack, but I have added this mechanic and this mechanic and this mechanic to make it different. And it works really well for stories like Firefly, Farscape, and Star Trek. Boom. That's your 30-second pitch. Then you need your 1-minute pitch, and then you've got a longer pitch. The longer pitch probably won't be used unless you're actually asked to do a meeting about the game. But you still want to have it ready. If you want to be prepared, come up with different versions of these also that are customized to different audiences. So, for example, if you're talking to like I was talking about Snowbright Studios a minute ago, if you are a person who identifies as LGBTQ and you're pitching a game to them, your pitch for them is probably going to be a little bit different than if you're pitching to Renegade or if you're pitching to Evil Hat or something like that, just because of who their core audience is. So you can pitch these companies the same game, but you might want to tweak the language and what you focus on for those pitches. Be confident, but be friendly. And you have to believe in your game or nobody else will. So it's this weird balance of being super confident, but not being like overly like full of yourself. So being friendly, but also being like, I've got this amazing thing. I want to share it with you. You have to, it takes a lot of practice. So definitely practice these things with people you know before you're going to be in a situation where you might have to actually run into somebody. But yeah, the process is a little different for each company. This is for writing pitches. So most companies ask for written submissions. So you want a 2 or 3 sentence pitch for this. You want a paragraph long pitch, and then you want like a full page pitch that really goes into all the depth and detail. Optional, these are things that often are used as well. There's a sell sheet, sometimes also called a pitch sheet, and then a pitch deck, which basically are these things with like fancy pictures and stuff like that. I do want to make sure that if anybody has questions about the pitches, I know those are difficult things. What to have in your pitch? You have to prioritize based on the length of your pitch. So if you're doing a 2-sentence pitch, you're going to get like 2 of these things in. Okay. If you're doing a paragraph pitch, you should try and get as much as possible in. You need a short description of the game's heart. Like, what is this game about? You want to have the setting and the tone, the audience that you expect to really want the game, components needed to play. Again, if you need specific maps or if you need specific dice for it or things like that. Mechanics, brief description of the mechanics. It's a D6 pool system. It's a D20 game. It's whatever it is. Number of players. There's more and more people and publishers are interested in like 2-player games and even some solo games. So make sure you're expressing how many people you expect. You want to make sure you state this because while most people will just assume for RPGs, it's like the normal 4 to 6 players and things like that. Laying it out there and making it specific really helps. There's no question about it or assumption. Session playtime. More and more games are starting to be set in different lengths of play. And that's great. If yours has a shorter playtime, that's something that you can like really show. It's like, this is easier for people to play because it's much easier to find an hour with your friends than 4 hours with your friends. So things like that. So things like that can be a selling point or at least just a clarification so they know what you're selling them. And then the current stage of development. Is this is an idea I have written down. I've written the entire manuscript and I'm ready for publication. So somewhere in between those 2 places. So make sure you let them know where you are in that place too. What is a sell sheet or a pitch deck? A sell sheet is basically a catch-all term for a 1-page reference. It's a document about the game. It basically has all the info from the pitch that I just showed you, but in kind of in bullet points, very easy to read with some nice layout and some images. A lot of times they actually were developed because they're used to sell games from publishers to retailers. So like when I'm trying to get retailers to pick up my games that I self-publish, I have these nice sell sheets, and you'll see one in a second, that have all the information I just talked about, really nice with like a picture and a little like QR code about where they can get more information and things like that. And so those are very helpful. You wouldn't have to have all the same information for a pitch sheet. So I'll talk about that in a second when I show it to you. And then similar to a sell sheet is the pitch deck. They're kind of a multi-page PDF or slide presentation that covers the same information. These are actually sneaking into the industry more and more because of the actual play scene. When I worked in entertainment, we'd do pitch decks to try and get studios to hire the company I was working for events, because we did like after parties and stuff like that. So we do a pitch deck that showed, this bar would glow like this. So it's like to get them to see your vision. And as more and more the industry of actual plays and role-playing games and production and entertainment industry has kind of collided, pitch decks are starting to be something that are popping up. Spencer Stark, actually, that like when he first started doing games as a scriptwriter, he came from the industry and he was doing pitch decks and sending them to people. So it was interesting, kind of back in the day, like how he would do that, and he shared some of them with me at one point. It was just kind of interesting to see how that is kind of permeating things. That's not the norm. If you send that, a lot of times people don't necessarily know what it is, but it can be helpful if you're using them in a meeting, or if someone asks for more information, that can be something you can send them to. It's definitely not something you just send to someone cold, but you might send them a pitch sheet or a sell sheet cold. This is an example of my sell sheet. Again, this one is specific for retailers. So this whole section down here about MSRP, categories, product code, USPC with the barcode, dimensions of the box, how many are in a case, none of that would be on yours. But these other things like how to play, quotes by people who have played the game and really enjoyed it, pictures, you may not have pictures, but you might have, like I said, stock art or something that kind of captures the vibe of the game, just so there's something visually interesting that kind of like helps communicate that feeling, the tone, and the setting of the game. The product pitch, the selling points, and then like the target markets who are going to be interested in your game. And then like contact information too. Yeah, so this is a sell sheet. If you do end up self-publishing, you will eventually make them. And if your game gets made, publishers will make these for your games, but with all this information down here meant for retailers. And the next are just like 2 pages of a pitch deck. I didn't want to put the whole thing because it's kind of long, but like, here it is. It's telling you like the game and then kind of what it does. And then there's like another page. Here's currently what Decima can do. And here are some marketing ideas. You could, adapt it for Roll20 and other virtual. So these are ways they could make money off of it in the future. Like I said, like I did send out the pitch decks. I did get an offer. I did decide not to do it since they didn't want to use the art. But yeah, it's a great way to give more information. And like I'm doing right now, if you end up in an actual pitch, like with a company, having it for them to reference instead of you just being like a talking head is always really impressive and helpful. And having something that is like Decima is a tarot-based game, so it's like the vibe of this. You can see the difference between this slide and like the slides I'm using for the presentation. Like the fonts, the colors, all that stuff is very tailored to fit the vibe of the game. So that's the other cool thing about a pitch deck is even if you don't have a ton of art, because you shouldn't buy art, don't buy art without using a whole bunch of art. But again, like it's not industry standard yet. It's something that's sort of creeping in that some people have. Sell sheets are definitely industry standard. All right, checking for more questions. Oh, we have 15 minutes. Okay, gotta go faster. What are the general expectations regarding formatting, stylizing of the rules, etc. when pitching to the publisher? How much should I put in building a table of contents, sections, indexed, etc., making it look clean versus when I hand it off, they'll change it anyway, like art? Honestly, like all that stuff, if they can understand it and read it, that's going to be probably fine. We're going to talk about the pitch process right now, so it'll clarify that just a little bit. So I'll make sure I speak to that in just a second. All right, so the pitch process. So you actually get to shoot your shot here. Always be professional, always 100%, always, always, always. As I said earlier, the TTRPG scene is incredibly tiny. And when you're talking about actual publishers, it's even more tiny. It's so tiny. It's so tiny, friends. Like there's like 20 people and they all know each other. Maybe a few more than 20, but everybody knows each other. Everybody's worked together. Everybody has had dinner at a convention or volunteered for different things on different organizations. Like everybody knows each other. So networking is really huge. Getting to know people, get your foot in the door, and getting to know them before you have something to sell is incredibly important. Like everybody knows like, oh, okay, you're being nice because you want something from me. But if they know you from the community, they will be much more likely to like help you out. And I've seen this firsthand a bunch of times. And go to conventions and go to events. Support them. If you want to volunteer to run games for a publisher at a convention, that's a great way to get to know them. Also join industry organizations and committees. Like I was saying earlier that I'm on the Game Manufacturers Association. I'm on their DEI committee. I'm on their Pathways committee. So 3 times a month, I have meetings with, the high ups. They're not about publishing, but like Mark Diaz-Truman from Magpie, I see him a couple times a month in these meetings. The people from Starbright Studios, from all these other places. Like I have one-on-one conversations with them. I text them about work, these things. So it gives me like a leg up. If I ever did want to offer to publish through these companies, I know them. They know me. They know who I am as a person. And they're like, okay, I don't have to worry about, her ending up being a terrible person. So now I just need to see the contents of your game. It just like you get your foot in the door, and it's huge. It's so helpful. And yeah, that's part of one of the great things about, Rising Tide. Like We're all trying to help each other. We're all trying to do this together, right? So that next step is taking leadership positions, starting to get to know people, organizing people, getting your face known, making friends with these people, buying them a beer if you see them at a convention or whatever. So yeah, and the game industry, again, is small. And TTRPGs are even a tinier fraction of the industry. So like Ennies are kind of one of the bigger awards in TTRPGs. I will never forget, I was at Gamma Expo and I was in a panel from distributors. They were like game industry distributors. They only worked with games. And I was asking something, my game won an Ennie, should I put on the package for distribution or whatever? It was some question like that. And like nobody on the panel of like 9 people knew what an Ennie was. Because TTRPGs are not something they generally think about. There's a very small number of people in the industry who really focus on TTRPGs in any way in the games and tabletop industry as a whole. So it makes it even more important that, you are known and respected and professional. So do not lose your cool in a pitch meeting. Do not send rude replies to rejections. Always send the nice, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to submitting something to you in the future. Something like some variation on that. Do not complain to others in the industry about a publisher who doesn't pick up your game. Do not put down, okay, this is really key. Do not put down other games in your pitch. For example, my game is D&D but good. Like I legit have heard people say this, and the number of times that someone has worked on that project, they maybe like D&D has a ton of different people working on it all the time. A lot of them don't get credited. A lot of people in the industry don't get credited on stuff. Like that's never a way to make a good point. Don't ever do that. If you can't pitch your game without putting down another game, you need to work on your pitch and you need to find the heart of your game because you don't know the heart of your game. This is super key. You never know. People who design the most floofy indie story narrative games out there now, a lot of them at some point have written for other games that maybe you don't like, maybe they're not your cup of tea, or maybe the other way around. Maybe you don't like story floofy games, and you're very into like more trad games, I'm going to write stuff for Traveler or whatever. Great. Don't put other games down. You have no idea what someone writes in their free time and what they love. Don't ever do it. And keep your public-facing social media appropriate if it can be linked to you. Or if you're going to post stuff, if you're going to post political and stuff, own it. Be ready to own it. Because you might get asked for it, and it might make it so people don't want to work with you in the publishing industry. I'm not saying not to. I am very political on my social media, and I just know that that's going to be there. I might have consequences of that. To me, I take that, and I'm like, okay, I'm willing to use my platforms to speak out about things I care about, and understand that might limit things later on the other end for me. So you need to kind of balance that and be aware of that. Because one of the first things, if they like your pitch, one of the first things they're going to do is to look you up and see what you're about. Because, if they Google you and they find a bunch of pictures of like swastika t-shirts and stuff, they're not going to want to work with you. So that's one of the first things they're going to do probably before they even really reply to you to say, hey, we kind of like your idea. And yes, Jay just added something great to the chat. Tell people what your game is, not what it isn't. Absolutely, 100%. The other thing is finding something that's old and being like, oh, this is the new version of this. Like, oh, this is like space, this is like Traveler, but modern. It's not necessarily putting it down, but it's still, it's using something else to define what your game is. And again, like tell people what your game is, not what it isn't. And you can use reference points like later in the conversation, but that should never be part of your initial pitch. Don't pitch to everyone. We kind of talked about this a little bit earlier with the questions. Research as many different publishers as you can. Find out their brand identity. What games do they do? If it's a game, if it's a publishing house that only does, third-party 5e stuff, don't go pitch them your PBTA game. That's never going to work. Don't waste your time. Don't waste their time. Who buys their games? If there's a specific audience that likes your stuff, like find people who buy other games, in that audience and what game companies they buy stuff for. What games do they already make? And what games are their most recent? They don't want to publish their own competition. So look at what they do and then also look at what they've done recently. And then look at if they're accepting pitches. So like if you go on Evil Hat's website, they have a really easy place you can find where to submit pitches, but they have a really clear statement on there about, I think they're closed right now till like 2025 or something. So like if they're not accepting pitches, don't bother them. That just annoys them. It makes them upset. It means they're too busy right now to publish more things. So just wait. If you want to work with them, wait. And then what is their reputation? This is, again, cycles back to the industry and getting to know people in the industry. There are some companies that have a beautiful, shiny reputation that, like, with their fans. That flip side, like, if you talk to people who've worked with them on a professional level, don't have so great a reputation. So people maybe don't necessarily want to work with them anymore, or they let people go for bad reasons, or there's just a million ways that a company can be toxic to work with. And getting into the industry and like communities like this, you'll find those people. And again, people aren't going to want to say it out loud. Most people aren't going to, with their whole chest, be posting all over social media about how so-and-so publishing company screwed them over. Again, because it's a very tiny industry. But if you get people that you know that start to trust you, they'll be like, hey, okay, don't tell anyone, but so-and-so company really just screwed over, the designer of their last big game. And they've got almost nothing from it, whatever it is. So that's how making connections really can help you in the industry as well. Not just get your games published, but know who you want to trust to publish your games. And do not send unsolicited pitches. Just don't do it. They will get deleted without being read. This is for legal reasons. If a company looks at all their pitches and then by happenstance, or maybe they stole your idea, they publish their own thing, that puts them in legal, like, gray area and can put them in there's a chance they can be sued. So most companies will completely delete pitches that they get if they're not through a specific funnel or through a specific process, or if they're not open for submissions right now. So please don't do it. And it also just shows that you don't know how the industry works, and it annoys them, because if they're not accepting pitches right now, it's for a good reason. They're busy. They don't have enough bandwidth or space in their company or time in the company right now to work on another project. They're already booked. So check the company's website for submission info, or you can email them without giving information about your project, asking if they're currently accepting submissions. So that's something you can do. You can make sure you title it something very clear so they don't accidentally think it's a full submission. Don't attach anything to it. Be like, I have a project I think you'd enjoy. I'm wondering when you might open your submissions, or if your submissions are open, or who I would contact if I have a submission. And that's only if it's not on their website. Be absolutely sure it's not on their website before you do that, because otherwise you're just going to annoy them again. Because if it's already posted, then they're going to be annoyed. All right. Each company has their own process. It used to be standard. For most of the processes, you start by submitting your pitches or a sell sheet by email or some sort of submission form. And some will ask you to include a current version of your manuscript. And this kind of gets back to the question that was asked a few minutes ago, formatting. As long as it's nice, don't put it in a weird font. Don't worry about tons of layout. Like, people get picked up all the time for like basic docs. As long as it's very clearly laid out so that they know what everything is, that should be fine. So there's no like specific template you should use for your game in order to get it picked up. And again, they're going to put it through their whole process. So don't pay for layout for a pitch. Don't pay for art for a pitch. Don't do any of these things specifically for a pitch. A nice PDF, from a Google Doc that's well worded and, at least somewhat proofread. It doesn't have to be perfect. They don't expect that. But if you can't spell anything, you should probably have someone else read it. But, that should be fine. And if you're chosen, they'll reach out to you for more information or more meetings. That might be when your pitch deck comes in, things like that. So, and they'll tell you the next steps. And it's different for all of them. For me, I like meeting the people first before, I see their pitch. I kind of talk to them. I'll have them present it to me, and then I'll read their manuscript. Some companies prefer to read the whole manuscript first and then reach out. So once you do the initial submission, it's very different based on kind of the personality of the company and who runs it. All right, step 5, success. All right, I've got 2 minutes. We can do this. We can do this, friends. Okay, they want your game. Okay, they want your game. Now what? Do not sign anything until the details are negotiated and explained to you. Make sure you understand all of them. I'm not kidding. Don't worry about looking ignorant. Don't worry about being like, oh, I'm going to look like I don't know what I'm doing, or I don't know. You don't know what you're doing. You're not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. We're not lawyers. I mean, maybe some of you are lawyers. I don't actually know. But if you're not a lawyer, like, make sure that you understand every part of the contract before you sign it. So you need to talk about things like payment. Is it going to be a flat fee? Is it going to be royalties? Okay. What is it going to be based on? Is it going to be on net? Is it going to be on gross? Is it going to be based on just the Kickstarter income? Like, obviously, I can't go through like every single thing for a contract, but these are the things you really need to think about. And when will it be paid? Is it going to be in a lump sum? Is it going to be on some sort of schedule or quarterly thing? Is it all going to be paid up front or maybe after the fact? What creative rights will you have? Your input and design? Will you have any input on design, art? Will you have input on additional writers or alterations? Okay, so those are all things you need to have in writing. Don't just assume, please make sure. And a lot of these things will be in a standard contract that the publishers will already have, but it never hurts to ask. Honestly, if they're at the point where they're offering you a contract, they really like what you've done, don't be a jerk about it, but definitely, shoot your shot. Be like, hey, I'd really love to continue having input, or I really don't want any other writers on the project, or I want to approve other writers on the project, or things like that. They might say no, and you have to be ready for them to say no. And again, that goes back to the very first section where you have to know where your lines are going to be. Things like grant of license. Are they going to have the worldwide license to your game? Regional license, language rights, digital, merchandise, virtual tabletop. All these things are different things. One of my games, Virgins and Vixens, I have the rights to sell it, everywhere. But I've sold off the rights to sell it in Spain. So there's a company out there that's publishing it. They've done translation. They've tweaked the game. My name's still on it, but they have exclusive rights to sell that game in Spanish in Spain. So these get very complicated very quickly. The termination, and license revision. This is really important. If a company goes under, for example, if they go bankrupt, you want to make sure you get those rights to that game back. Or maybe you don't. I don't know. Whatever your decision is. If they start selling off pieces of the company, they can sell away the rights to your game unless there's something in the contract that says you get it back if the company, terminates or bankrupts or whatever. Same thing about time-based, sales-based. If they haven't published any copies of your game in X number of years, do the rights revert back to you and you get to decide what to do with it, etc. Expansion rights. If they want to do an expansion or something like that. Consultation, the licensing percent, all those things, morality clauses. Notification requirements. You want to make sure that they have to legally notify you of big, important things. Intent to stop publication, if they want to republish something, new editions or whatever. And then, very important, crediting. Okay, your name, if you have a logo, your exact title and your exact credit on the game, and the placement of that information. So are you going to be, in the first page on the sheet? Are you going to be on the cover? All those things should be covered by your contract. And also use of your name and likeness. Like if they're crediting you with the game and they have your bio picture, how are they allowed to use that picture? Things like that. So find a lawyer, honestly. No, really, find a contract lawyer who can go over your final offer. Like negotiate with them, talk about them back and forth a little bit, but it is probably especially if you're working with a bigger company, very worth your time to pay a contract lawyer an hour of their time to go over it. Most of them are pretty boilerplate. They seem super complicated to us, but an actual contract lawyer with a specialty in commerce or things like that, it won't take them a super long time to just kind of read through it and be like, hey, this means this. Did you know that? So if you can afford that, it is very, very helpful. And if you can't afford that, make contacts through the community, because there's a lot of people who have, who are lawyers and can kind of help you out with that if they know you and trust you. All right. Whew. 2 minutes over. That's not too bad. Okay. Thank you so much. If you have questions, we're actually going to do like an AMA, I guess, in the chat. And if you want to contact me directly with more questions, that's fine. You can reach me at info@goldenlassogames.com. You can find my games and stuff at goldenlassogames.com. I'm also at kimihughes.card.co. It has all my socials and stuff. I'm very active on socials and stuff like that. And I have a Kickstarter coming up. So if you want to check out my game that I'm kickstarting, you can go to goldenlassogames.com/Kickstarter, and that will redirect you to that page. Thank you all for being here. I hope that you learned something and that this was helpful. If you have things that you want to know more about or you have more questions about, great. If you're interested in self-publishing, my next seminar will be about self-publishing your game, and then the third one will be about distribution, which is like the most complicated, like scary part, and it's very strange. But anyway, thank you all for being here. I really, really appreciate this community and your time and that you're interested in this. I hope it's helpful.